I want to bring in Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican, who's made no secret of his belief that the U.S. should take a much stronger stance against Assad, arming the rebels and more. I also want to bring in our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, chief congressional correspondent, Dana Bash, and our chief domestic affairs correspondent, Jessica Yellen. They will be with us all hour. So, Senator Graham, thanks for being here. Do you think that what the president said tonight will have any impact on, say, the voters in your state, where I believe, like all over the country, they're skeptical of this plan?
Well, I thought the moral case was very persuasive, quite frankly, and compelling, and that was what I remember most about the speech. When you ask yourself, when this is over, what do I remember? I remember that we're an exceptional nation, that what Assad did violated the basic laws of humanity, and if we don't act, who will? And they expect us to look the other way, and we can't afford to. So here's the takeaway for me. After the leader of the free world made such an impassioned plea for moral outrage and a response, it's impossible for him not to react if diplomacy fails, not to act. So if diplomacy fails, he's painted himself in a corner. The leader of the free world can't say all these things. At the end of the day, do nothing. Well,
one thing I read in your Twitter feed, of which I'm an avid reader, as is America.
You need to get a lot.
Is that you don't think that he made the national security case?
No, I remember.
What is the national security case?
Well, look at it this way. Iran. One line about Iran. Of all the things that I worry about changing the world for the worse, it's not Syria, it's the Iranians getting a nuclear weapon. And how can you mention Syria without talking about the Iranians? The Ayatollahs are sizing us up. And if we get Syria wrong, we'll be under the world, because the Iranians are going to take this as a weak American response in Syria, and they're off the races to their nuclear weapon.
And Senator, part of the reason I think you would agree that the president wanted you all just to hold off on this vote on authorization is because the votes weren't there. Is that fair to say?
Probably.
So do you think the president said anything that will persuade any of your colleagues, or maybe enough of your colleagues, to support any kind of military strike, even if it's just sort of the teeth-to-back diplomacy?
I think he probably stopped some Democratic bleeding. I think it's probably...
Enough?
Maybe. I mean, you know, right now, I don't know what the vote total's on the Democratic side, but we could probably muster double digits on our side at best, but this is a process. This is the first step. If it's 50-47, that's progress.
Well, when you said, though, that he's backed himself into a corner,
yeah,
and now he's got to act. So say the UN falls apart, which I think you
I can't believe that's a possibility, but let's just assume, let's assume the Russians. Let's assume the Russians are not the beacon and hope of mankind.
Okay, let's stipulate that if you want. Okay, so if you assume that it's going to fall apart as you do,
but
and
I'm
you
willing
say
to try, actually.
Okay, but you say he's backed himself into a corner. So does he even have to go to Congress?
You know, there's probably a reason for 225 times presidents didn't come to Congress. I don't know if I'd come to talk with us. Quite frankly, the president has mismanaged this from day one about what we're trying to do, the goals we're trying to achieve. I think he made an unbelievably compelling case that we need to act here, and compare that to the unbelievably small response we're going to give. So at the end of the day, if I were the president, I would act after this speech if the diplomacy fell apart, and I wouldn't come back to Congress.
Do you think he should?
Because if he doesn't, his credibility as a world leader is completely shot. You can't address the world and talk to your enemies and your friends in the tone he did and do nothing.
But is it a mistake not to lay out a time frame for diplomacy to work?
Oh, don't worry. The Congress will help him there. If 2 weeks from now we're still talking about what the inventory in Syria is like for the chemical weapons, nobody is going to be able to tolerate that.
Really? You don't think he's shown exceptional patience to date?
What I think is the president really is trying to do. Force does matter. I don't think we'd have this conversation without the threat of military force. I really believe the president's right about that. When the Foreign Relations Committee passed a resolution, I think Assad and Russia took this a bit differently.
Let me ask you a question. A senior White House official told me that this was the goal for the speech. He said the purposes of the speech was to acknowledge the public's misgivings, to address them. He went through the list. We did not expect to swing public opinion. The idea was to spell out in detail why the use of chemical weapons in Syria matters, why it's a long-term threat to the U.S., why the international community led by the U.S. should respond, and why the Russian diplomatic initiative never would have happened if it weren't for the threat of U.S. force. Do you think he achieved these things?
I think he's 3 for 4.
3 for 4.
That's pretty good in baseball. Yeah, I think the one thing he forgot to tell us is what happens if this war goes on for a year. Does it matter if the King of Jordan is a victim of the Civil War? I think it matters a lot. Does it matter that Iraq,
You just talk about the war going on for, you're talking about the Civil War, or you're talking about the U.S. involvement?
I'm talking about the consequences of this.
You're talking national security.
Yeah, national security. What happens if Assad is winning a year
if the Civil
from now?
War, okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Is it a civil war? Is it something greater? Clearly, it's a civil war with catastrophic regional consequences. Losing the King of Jordan is a high likelihood if Assad is winning a year from now. Iraq is falling apart, mainly because of Syria, not completely.
But why do we lose the King of Jordan?
Because of refugees. He's told me I can't. Well, one reason we're going to lose him, he's told me and Senator McCain, I've got 600,000 Syrian refugees, 40,000 new Syrian kids in Jordanian schools, and he's hanging on by a thread. If he has another 400 or 500,000, he's gone.
But to that, you're making the regional argument that you and others, I've heard this also tonight, that they were concerned that the president didn't make. But, you know, it wasn't that long ago. It seems like 6 lifetimes ago. It wasn't that long ago that you were standing on the president's driveway, frankly, trashing him and saying that he should have been out there talking about this on a more broad level with regard to dealing with Syria.
I'll continue to trash him in that regard.
I'm sure you're going to be invited for dinner.
Well, no, I like the president, actually.
No, but you were, in all seriousness, you were trying to extract leverage out of him with this particular situation by getting him to do even more, arm the rebels. And is that now completely off the table?
The president's
in a
bind.
Chemical weapons?
No, people don't want to get involved in the Mideast any more than they have to. The night before the 12th anniversary, we would be talking about what should we do if there's a chemical weapons attack by Assad. What should be the response?
You're saying 12 years ago, it would have been a no-brainer, we go in.
I'm saying that we're losing the lessons of 9/11, that Iraq is a lot to be learned from Iraq. But it can't overshadow the lessons of 9/11, and they're pretty simple to me. Safe havens for al-Qaeda are forming in Syria. They're beginning to form again in western Iraq. And Iran, the biggest prize of all, is to stop their nuclear ambitions. And the way we're handling this is making it more likely the Iranians will get a nuclear weapon and al-Qaeda will have more safe havens.
But let's talk about al-Qaeda, because, you know, one of the cons argument that the president actually laid out is that the rebels, you could, if you had armed the rebels, as some of you had wanted, or the rebels end up triumphing as a result of some kind of intervention, that you're handing over authority to bad guys.
Well, I thought the president did a pretty good job of knocking that down. The one thing I can tell everybody at this table and anybody still listening to this debate is that there are 35 million Syrians. The likelihood that they're fighting to get rid of Assad to be ruled by al-Qaeda is 0. Are there al-Qaeda members filling in the vacuum? Yeah, most of them are coming from Iraq. There's indigenous problems and they're foreign fighters. I have no concern whatsoever that al-Qaeda will win by force of arms at the ballot box in Syria. Are the rebels mixed? Are they radicals within the rebels? Will it be a confusing mess the day after Assad falls? Yes, but to say that our nation shouldn't help the opposition because al-Qaeda is present in Syria will lead to an al-Qaeda-run nation is, to me, just not plausible. And I thought the president did a pretty good job talking about that.
Have you convinced members of your own party?
Well, when I hear a member of my party say, we'll be the Air Force for al-Qaeda, I say, have you ever actually been to the region? Have you sat down and talked with any? Well, if Ted said that, I'm talking about Ted Cruz. The idea that Syria is going to wind up under al-Qaeda control is not plausible. The idea there will be a bloodbath after Assad falls is realistic. The longer it goes, the worse it gets. But this is not about replacing Assad with al-Qaeda from our point of view.
You've already stated you don't trust the Russians. I have to say, the number of members of Congress flocking to embrace this plan from Putin, not to mention members of the administration, I can't help but feel that there's a certain desperation there to get out of this pickle as opposed to a real optimism that this could work. Well, am I being cynical?
Well, yes, but maybe deserved so. But let's look at, in all honesty, do you believe the Russians have been affected by the threat of a strike in Syria? I think that's a possibility. Why not try it? Everything that the piece outlined is true. But if you could secure the weapons in a couple of months, I don't care if it takes a couple of years to destroy them, the world would be better. John and I have been pretty hard on this, right?
John McCain.
Yeah, so I'm just here to tell you that no matter what you hear from me, I don't want any more war than necessary. I've seen what it does to people, and if there's 1 in 100 chance that this could yield a result to get the chemical weapons off the market, even though it would leave him in power, I would be willing to take that, but we're not going to wait for weeks or months. This has got to be done pretty quickly.
Well, should there be a timetable?
Yeah. Yes.
So what should it be?
Well, I think a couple of weeks to get I think Britain, France, and the United States should introduce a resolution, challenge the Russians to put up or shut up, listen to their suggestions to change it, and have a vote. Not let this draw out, draft up a resolution, a united front by the 3 countries I named, and tell our Russian friends and colleagues, how would you want to change it? Tell me in 24 hours, then let's vote.
Putin said no threat of the use of force, though.
Well, you know, again, that makes the cynic and Jake come true here. I've never really believed this was a reality, but I'm willing to try it.
And how much of a position should Congress have? I know you're working with several of your counterparts, Democrats and Republicans, to come up with a modified authorization to deal with diplomacy.
You only have one commander-in-chief and one secretary of state. Now I know why. As much as we've criticized these guys, could you imagine 535 of us doing this? So at the end of the day, I think you will see, if there's a serious pathway forward in the United Nations, a resolution of force that will have an exit ramp, an off-ramp for UN action if it really comes to pass.
But why is it worth engaging this at all now? Respectfully, they have had 2 years. They've had more than 2 years. If they were serious about doing this, they've had plenty of time to come forward.
Why is it worth it if you could take 1,000 tons or whatever the number is of chemical weapons off the market away from Assad, deny that to Hezbollah and maybe some al-Qaeda elements that could overrun these caches? It'd be the best couple of weeks you could ever spend.
But you just said you don't trust them.
There's a lot of things I don't trust, but at the end of the day, let's try it, because the goal, if we could successfully defang Assad and take the chemical weapons off the market, it would be a great outcome.
Can I get back to Jake's point, though, which is that I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that this would sort of be in everyone's mutual self-interest to get this off the table in Congress, so they don't have to vote. You're shaking, you're nodding your head. Get it off the president's docket. He's got a lot of other stuff to deal with, right? I mean, is this kind of mutual maybe get it off Russia's docket?
I think there's a mutual benefit to try to see if this thing can end better than it's ending today. And if you could have a pathway in the UN, let's try it. But if it fails, then I think the president could look everybody in the eye. I've tried everything I know to do. I even tried to work with the Russians. And when Lindsey Graham says he's willing to work with the Russians, that shows you that we're trying to do everything possible to get these weapons off the market and avoid a conflict.
So you're saying it's not phony, it's real?
I'm telling you, if it fails, if a couple of weeks from now, it clearly is not going to happen. After this speech, I cannot imagine the President of the United States, after saying the things he said tonight, the answer is that he used these weapons and we didn't do a damn thing about it as a nation. Can you imagine how that would play out in the world with the case being made tonight and all the things he said? Nothing ever happened in Syria?
Okay, so game it out for us. Let's say it doesn't work out, which I think we can all agree the odds are it's not going to work. But we all hope it will, but it probably won't.
Right.
Then what? Then what does the president need to do?
And the president has to use military force to strike
without
Syria.
Congress, even after he's talked about the oldest
in my
constitutional
view,
democracy
after tonight,
Western
he has no
civilization.
options.
So you think
he can't
set
hide behind us?
Could he get a vote by Congress? Could he get the authorization from Congress?
Well, I don't know if he moved the numbers tonight in the House. It seems highly unlikely.
No, but in a few weeks. If this
I don't know.
Russia option doesn't work.
I don't know if things change. Anything's possible, but I'm assuming right now that 2 weeks from now the House will not authorize.
So you had dinner with the president and the vice president a couple of days ago. Can you give us a little behind the scenes, anything that maybe we should know about their thinking? I know.
Yeah, the president's working really hard and he's taking this really seriously.
No, but
he really is.
This is a Republican senator who is,
no, it sounds like the kind of thing that
is not uncontested back home.
Go off the record and say the president's awesome.
That's what I mean. It's hard work. I mean, you could get in trouble back home.
Easiest thing politically for me at home, if Obama says A, I say B. You know, when Bush made some mistakes in Iraq, I said, hey, I think this is a mistake. But at the end of the day, I know the president has screwed this up in about 1,000 different ways, but name a time when some things haven't been screwed up in foreign policy. This is not the first time, but this may be really at the top of the list of how to screw things up. I think he really is trying to find a way to get the answer right, but after tonight's speech, there is no other right answer. If diplomacy does not achieve the desired result of taking these weapons off the market, he must act. And if I was in Syria tonight and I heard this speech, I don't know what it's going to do here in America, but if I'm Assad, I've got to believe after tonight I'm going to get hit.
All right, Senator Lindsey Graham, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate